A hissing gift, an ultimatum, pay up or lose your grandkids. My answer cut them off and shocked them into silence. The package arrived on Father's Day morning, completely unexpected. I was sitting on my front porch with my coffee, watching neighbors emerge for their weekend activities when the delivery truck pulled up. The driver approached with that professional efficiency you see on Holiday over time, carrying a medium-sized box that looked innocent enough. "Happy Father's Day," he said, handing me the package along with his electronic clipboard. "Someone must think highly of you to pay for Sunday delivery." I signed for it, studying the shipping label as he walked away. No return address visible, just generic shipping information. The box felt surprisingly light for its size, roughly the dimensions of a shoebox, but weighing maybe 2 pounds at most. Strange, but not alarming. Not yet. "Who's that from?" Jessica called from the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "No idea," I replied, carrying the package inside. "No return address." Jessica approached, her expression shifting from curious to cautious. She'd always been more suspicious of unexpected deliveries than I was. Too many years of hearing about package bombs and mail fraud on the evening news had made her wary of anything unusual. "Maybe it's from the grandchildren," she suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. "Emma did ask about Father's Day when we saw them last month." I agreed it could be, though something felt off about the timing. It seemed too convenient, too calculated. And Emma certainly wouldn't have paid for special Sunday delivery. As I set the box on our coffee table, Jessica leaned closer, examining it with the methodical attention she brought to everything from grocery shopping to crossword puzzles. Her fingers traced the edges of the shipping label, and then she stopped. Her face went pale. "William," she said slowly, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "don't open it." "Why not?" I asked, looking down at what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary package. "Can't you see?" She pointed to something I'd missed entirely in my casual handling. "Look closer, those tiny holes along the sides." Now that she'd pointed them out, I could see them. Small, precise punctures in the cardboard, barely visible unless you knew to look. They were deliberately made, carefully placed. "They're breathing holes," Jessica said, backing away from the coffee table, "which means something alive is inside." My stomach dropped. The innocent-looking package suddenly took on a sinister quality. We stood there in our living room, staring at the box as if it might suddenly sprout legs and run away. The morning sunlight streaming through our windows seemed less warm now, the suburban quiet more ominous. "Who would send us something alive?" Jessica whispered. But even as she asked the question, I felt a cold certainty settling in my chest. The timing wasn't coincidental. Father's Day delivery from an anonymous sender who knew our address, our schedules, our vulnerabilities. This wasn't a gift from loving grandchildren. This was something else entirely. From inside the box came the faintest sound, a soft rustling that made us both freeze. The sound stopped as quickly as it had started, leaving us in tense silence. Jessica grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin through the cotton of my polo shirt. "Did you hear that?" she breathed. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. Whatever was in that box was very much alive, and it was waking up. Then came the sound that sent ice through my veins. A soft hissing emerged from the cardboard, barely audible but unmistakably real. We both froze, staring at the package as if it might explode at any moment. The sound stopped, silence stretching between us like a held breath. Then it came again, longer this time. A distinct hiss that left no doubt about what we were dealing with. Jessica's grip on my arm tightened until her nails bit through the fabric of my shirt. "William," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Call someone now." My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, muscle memory taking over while my mind struggled to process what we were facing. The numbers felt foreign under my trembling fingers as I dialed 911. "What's your emergency?" "We have a suspicious package here with something alive inside," I said, the words tumbling out faster than I intended. "It was delivered this morning with no return address and it's making sounds." "Sir, can you describe the sounds you're hearing?" I glanced at Jessica, who nodded encouragingly. The hissing had stopped again, but we both knew it would return. "Hissing," I said, unable to finish the thought, like a snake. The words felt too dangerous to voice aloud. "Are there any visible threats or damage to the package?" "No visible damage, but there are small holes punched in the cardboard. Breathing holes." My voice cracked on the last words. Sir, I'm dispatching officers to your location immediately. Please maintain a safe distance from the package and do not attempt to open it under any circumstances. Can you move to another room? We're about 6 feet away in our living room. Should we leave the house? Stay inside, but keep your distance. Officers should arrive within 10 minutes. Do not touch or move the package. The line went quiet except for the dispatcher's typing. 10 minutes felt like an eternity when something dangerous was sitting on our coffee table, growing more active with each passing moment. Who could have done this, William? Jessica asked once I'd hung up. The question I'd been dreading. The answer felt obvious, but saying it out loud would make it real. Would acknowledge that someone we knew had crossed a line I'd never imagined possible. I'm afraid to guess, I admitted, but my mind was already there, connecting dots I didn't want to see. The timing on Father's Day wasn't coincidental. The anonymous sender who knew our address, our schedules, our vulnerabilities. Someone angry enough about recent events to plan something this elaborate, this cruel. Another sound from the box made us both step backward, not just hissing this time, but a rustling that suggested movement, something shifting position inside the confined space. The argument, Jessica said quietly. 6 days ago, she was so angry when she left. She didn't need to say the name. We were both thinking it, both arriving at the same horrible conclusion through different paths of logic and dread. But this, I gestured at the package, this isn't just anger. This is something else. Revenge. The word hung unspoken between us. Too ugly to voice, but impossible to ignore. The child we'd raised and supported and loved despite her flaws had sent us something designed to frighten or harm us. The box rustled again, more insistently this time. Whatever was inside was definitely awake now, probably confused by its surroundings, possibly agitated by our voices and movement. What kind of person does this to their own parents? Jessica's voice broke on the question. Someone desperate, I said, though the words felt inadequate. Someone who thinks they've been wronged. But deep down, I knew it was more than desperation. This required planning, calculation, a level of malice that spoke to something broken in the relationship between parent and child. This wasn't a lash of anger. This was a deliberate act of psychological warfare. The sound of car doors slamming outside made us both jump. Through the front window, I could see a police cruiser in our driveway. 2 officers walking toward our door with the purposeful stride of people trained to handle dangerous situations. Relief flooded through me so quickly it made my knees weak. Professional help had arrived. Soon, whatever nightmare lurked in that innocent-looking package would be someone else's responsibility to handle safely. The doorbell rang, sharp and authoritative in the tense quiet of our home. I opened the door before Officer Todd Reeves could knock a second time. His presence filled the doorframe, tall and solidly built with the practiced alertness of someone who'd handled domestic emergencies before. The nameplate on his uniform read, T. Reeves. Mr. Carr, he said, his voice carrying calm authority. We received your call about a suspicious package. Yes, thank you for coming so quickly. I stepped aside to let him enter. It's in the living room. He wiped his boots on our welcome mat before crossing the threshold, a small gesture that somehow made everything feel more manageable. Jessica appeared in the hallway, still wearing her apron, hands twisted nervously together. Officer, we're just so grateful you're here, she said. We didn't know what else to do. You did exactly the right thing, ma'am. His voice carried the kind of reassurance that comes from years of talking people through their worst moments. Can you show me the package? We led him to the living room, where the box sat on our coffee table, looking smaller now that professional help had arrived. Officer Reeves approached carefully, pulling latex gloves from his utility belt with practiced efficiency. When did this arrive? He asked, examining the package without touching it. About 35 minutes ago, I said. Sunday delivery. Someone paid extra for weekend service. He studied the shipping label, noting the absence of return address information. And you heard sounds coming from inside? Hissing, Jessica said quietly, unable to finish the thought. Like a snake, Officer Reeves completed matter-of-factly. I've handled similar situations before, usually non-venomous, but we take every precaution. He reached for his radio, speaking into it with professional brevity. Dispatch, this is Unit 47, requesting animal control services at 1247 Maple Street, suspected snake delivery and residential package. The radio crackled back with confirmation. 20 minutes for animal control to respond. Officer Reeves turned back to us, shifting from procedural efficiency to investigative curiosity. His eyes held the sharpness of someone trained to see patterns others might miss. "Do you have any idea who might have sent this?" he asked. The question I'd been dreading. I felt Jessica's eyes on me, waiting to see how I'd respond. The weight of family loyalty pressed against the need for honesty. "I don't know," I said carefully. "Probably just some kids playing pranks." His gaze sharpened slightly, reading the hesitation in my voice like a book with large print. "Ancient. Kids would need access to live animals, shipping materials, knowledge of your address," he said. "This required planning and resources." My mouth went dry. He was right, of course. Someone with means and motive had deliberately sent us a snake on Father's Day. The coincidence was too perfect, too targeted to be random. "Have you had any recent conflicts, family disagreements?" Family disagreements. The phrase hung in the air like an accusation. Jessica tensed beside me, both of us walking the tightrope between honesty and loyalty to someone who might not deserve it. "Nothing that would lead to this," I managed. Officer Reeves studied my face, noting the hesitation, but not pushing. Instead, he pulled out a small notebook, the kind cops carry for details that matter later. "Any unusual charges on your credit cards recently? Pet stores, exotic animal suppliers?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Pet stores. The memory crashed over me with terrible clarity. That charge I'd noticed on last month's statement. She used my credit card for emergencies, had for years. Reptile Palace, $127.50. I'd assumed it was something for the grandchildren. A small pet, maybe a lizard or turtle, not a snake, never a snake. "Mr. Carr, are you all right?" I forced my expression back to neutral, though my heart hammered against my ribs like a caged bird. "I'm fine, just processing all this." But I wasn't fine. The puzzle pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. The timing, the knowledge of our routines, the access to my credit card, the deliberate cruelty of choosing Father's Day. My daughter had sent me a snake. "Will you be filing a formal report?" Officer Reeves asked. "We can investigate the package origin, pursue charges if we identify the sender." I looked at Jessica, saw the same conflict behind her eyes. Part of me wanted justice, wanted someone held accountable for this violation of our home and peace of mind. But the larger part, the part that had spent 34 years protecting her despite her flaws, couldn't turn her over to police. "No," I said quietly. "I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill. If it's just a prank, filing charges seems excessive." Officer Reeves made a note, though his expression suggested he'd heard this response before. Family loyalty trumping justice, even when family members crossed dangerous lines. Another vehicle pulled into our driveway. Through the window, I could see a white van with Animal Control Services painted on the side in bold letters. "That'll be Mike Johnson," Officer Reeves said. "Best wildlife specialist in the county. He'll have this resolved safely within the hour." But as I watched the animal control officer grab his equipment, I knew the real situation was just beginning. The snake in the box was only a symptom of something much larger, much more complicated than a simple prank gone wrong. Mike Johnson from Animal Control worked with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd handled stranger situations than ours. He was a lean man in his 50s, with the calm demeanor that comes from years of dealing with creatures that bite first and ask questions later. Within 20 minutes, he'd safely extracted a 3-foot corn snake from the shipping box, confirmed it was non-venomous, and loaded it into a secure carrier for transport to a local reptile rescue. "Beautiful specimen," he said, securing the carrier in his van. "Someone paid good money for this one. Corn snakes make excellent pets when properly cared for. Shame someone used it for whatever this was." Officer Reeves shook hands with both of us before departing. "Call if you remember anything else about possible senders, Mr. Carr. Even pranks like this can escalate if left unchecked." I nodded, maintaining the facade of cooperation while my mind churned with darker possibilities. Both vehicles disappeared down our quiet suburban street, leaving Jessica and me alone with the morning's aftermath. The living room felt different now, violated somehow despite the professional cleanup. The coffee table bore faint water stains where Mike had disinfected the surface. The scattered morning newspaper had been restacked neatly, but the peaceful Father's Day we'd planned was shattered beyond repair. Jessica busied herself in the kitchen, running water in the sink with unnecessary vigor. Stress cleaning, her standard response to family crisis. I stood at the front window watching the Hendersons return from their Father's Day outing, their car loaded with picnic gear and children's laughter. Normal families, normal Sunday mornings, normal fathers who didn't receive venomous surprises from their daughters. The credit card charge burned in my memory like a brand. Reptile Palace, $127.50 3 weeks ago, right after our argument about the inheritance. Perfect timing for planning revenge. My phone felt heavy in my hands as I scrolled to her contact information. Her smiling photo looked back at me, a picture from Emma's birthday party last year, before the financial demands had escalated, before the threats about grandchildren access, before this morning's snake delivery. "Are you really going to call her?" Jessica asked quietly from the kitchen doorway. "I need to know for certain." The question hung between us like a challenge. What would I do if my suspicions were confirmed? What action could a father take against a daughter who'd crossed such a fundamental line? I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew the conversation was necessary. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Dad?" Her voice carried artificial brightness, the tone she used when she wanted something or was hiding something. "How's your Father's Day going?" My grip tightened on the phone. How's my Father's Day going? If she was innocent, the question was natural. If she was guilty, it was cruel mockery. "Interesting morning, actually." I kept my voice neutral, conversational. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about a strange Father's Day gift?" "No, Dad, what happened?" Her response came quickly, almost too quickly. But it was what happened next that confirmed my worst suspicions. In the background, unmistakably, I heard Peter's quiet laughter. Not the surprised chuckle of someone hearing unexpected news, but the satisfied snicker of someone who thought they'd gotten away with something clever. The sound hit me like a physical blow. All doubt vanished in that moment of careless amusement. My daughter had sent me a snake, and her husband found it entertaining. "Just some confusion with the delivery," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Nothing important. I should let you go." "Are you sure everything's okay? You sound strange." Strange? I was discovering that my only daughter had tried to terrorize me with a live reptile, and she thought I sounded strange. "Everything's fine. Enjoy your Sunday." I ended the call before she could respond, before my carefully maintained composure could crack completely. The phone trembled in my hands as the full weight of betrayal settled over me. Jessica appeared at my side, reading my face with the intuition of 38 years of marriage. "You heard something?" Peter laughed. The words came out flat, emotionless. In the background, when she asked what happened, he laughed like it was the funniest joke he'd ever heard. Her hand found my arm, a steadying presence in the shifting landscape of our family dynamics. "What are you going to do?" I looked down at the phone, then toward my home office, where the computer held access to bank accounts, credit cards, and all the financial tools that had kept her afloat for 3 years running. "I'm going to teach my daughter about consequences." 7 o'clock found me sitting in my home office, door closed, computer humming quietly in the evening stillness. I'd spent the afternoon in careful thought, walking through our neighborhood, reviewing 30 years of financial decisions that had brought us to this moment. The anger had settled into something colder, more purposeful. My desk held the accumulated evidence of a father's generosity, bank statements showing monthly transfers to cover her rent, credit card bills I'd paid without question, insurance premiums, car payments, emergency loans that were never repaid. 3 decades of enabling disguised as love. The leather portfolio beside my keyboard contained documents I'd reviewed dozens of times over the years. Copies of checks written for her wedding, receipts from the car I'd sold to pay her gambling debts, bank transfers labeled emergency assistance that had become monthly obligations. Each piece of paper told the same story of a daughter who had learned to see her father as an endless source of money rather than guidance. The computer screen glowed as I navigated to our online banking portal. My fingers moved steadily across the keyboard, typing the familiar passwords I'd never shared with her, though she'd managed to access plenty without them. First, the credit card account, the same one that showed the Reptile Palace charge from 3 weeks ago. She appeared as an authorized user, a status I'd granted her during college for emergencies. 20-year-old emergencies that had multiplied into a permanent lifestyle. I clicked on Manage Users. The system prompted me with security questions. My mother's maiden name, the street where I grew up, simple answers that unlocked access to tools I should have used years ago. Remove authorized user, the screen asked in neutral blue text. My cursor hovered over confirm for perhaps 10 seconds, not from hesitation, but from the profound shift I felt occurring within myself. 30 years I'd funded her irresponsibility. Enough. I clicked. User access revoked. Changes will take effect within 1 business hour. Next came the PIN changes. She had somehow learned the numbers, probably watching over my shoulder during one of our many financial rescue missions. I selected new digits, the year Jessica and I were married. Numbers that meant something to our relationship, but nothing to her schemes. The automated payments required more attention. Monthly transfers to her checking account, the recurring payment for her car insurance, a subscription service for her gym membership that she'd convinced me was essential for her mental health. Each cancellation required confirmation. A digital paper trail of my decision to stop being her private bank. My hands remained steady throughout the process. No trembling, no hesitation. This wasn't cruelty. It was overdue accountability. I remembered the conversation last month when she'd called, sobbing about the gambling debts, how she'd promised this was the last time, the final crisis I'd need to solve. I'd believed her, transferred another $5,000, and told Jessica we were helping our daughter learn responsibility. Instead, I'd been teaching her that consequences were optional. The final screen showed a summary of changes. Credit access removed, automatic payments canceled, PIN codes updated, the work of 30 years of enabling undone in 30 minutes of methodical clicking. Save changes. Outside my office window, the suburban evening continued its peaceful rhythm. The Hendersons were grilling dinner in their backyard. Mrs. Patterson walked her small dog past our mailbox. Normal families living normal lives, probably not dealing with adult children who sent live snakes as Father's Day gifts. I clicked Save. The confirmation appeared instantly. Account changes processed. Updated information will be available immediately. Leaning back in my leather desk chair, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years when it came to my daughter. Control. Not the desperate reactive scrambling to fix her latest crisis, but the calm authority of a parent who'd finally remembered that love sometimes requires saying no. Tomorrow morning, she would discover that her financial safety net had been removed. Her credit card would be declined, her automatic payments would bounce, her assumed access to my resources would simply end. For the first time in decades, the consequences of her choices would be entirely her own responsibility. The phone on my desk remained silent, but I knew that wouldn't last long. Morning arrived with unusual peace. I sat at our kitchen table with coffee and the newspaper, watching sunlight filter through Jessica's herb garden on the windowsill. For the first time in years, I felt no anxiety about potential financial emergencies, no dread of manipulative phone calls demanding immediate attention. Jessica moved quietly around the kitchen, refilling my coffee cup with the comfortable efficiency of 38 years of shared mornings. She'd asked no questions about my evening in the office, but her slight smile suggested she understood perfectly what I'd accomplished. The phone rang at 8:15. Her name appeared on the caller ID, exactly as expected. I let it ring twice more before answering, using those extra seconds to center myself for what was coming. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. "Dad, what have you done?" Her voice hit me like a physical assault, shrill with panic. "My card isn't working. I tried to buy groceries and it was declined. The automatic payment for my car insurance bounced. What is happening?" I took a sip of coffee before responding, savoring the moment of clarity I'd been working toward for 3 decades. "I know you sent me that Father's Day gift." The silence stretched for several heartbeats. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted from panic to defensive fury. "You've lost your mind. How could you accuse me of something so ridiculous?" "Set me up." "Not what are you talking about, or what Father's Day gift?" The woman who had sent me a snake was now accusing me of setting traps. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. "I didn't do anything," I said calmly. "I simply stopped paying for your irresponsibility." "This is insane. You can't just cut me off without warning. I have bills, obligations, responsibilities." Responsibilities. I let the word hang between us, like the responsibility to treat your parents with basic respect, like the responsibility to handle your own finances instead of depending on mine. Jessica had stopped her morning routine to watch my face, reading my expressions for signs of stress, but I felt remarkably calm, almost detached from her hysteria. "Dad, please, you don't understand. Peter and I are struggling right now. The apartment rent is due and my car payment. Your car payment that I've been making for 2 years, your apartment rent that comes out of my account every month. Perhaps it's time you understood what actual financial responsibility looks like. Fine. You want to play games?" Her voice rose to a pitch that would have concerned me yesterday. "Don't expect to see your grandchildren anytime soon. Emma and Jake won't even remember you by the time." "Stop," I cut her off with quiet firmness. "Those threats stopped working yesterday morning." The phone went silent except for her rapid breathing. I could almost hear her recalibrating, searching for the manipulation tactic that had always worked before. "I can't believe you're doing this to me," she whispered, switching to the victim voice that had opened my wallet countless times. "I'm your daughter. I'm struggling, and instead of helping me, you're punishing me for something I didn't even do." Something she didn't even do. Still no direct denial, no confusion about what gift I'd referenced. Just the blanket deflection of someone who knew exactly what she'd done and was angry about facing consequences. "Your struggle is not my responsibility," I said. "Your choices created your situation. Your choices sent that package. Your choices will determine what happens next." "You're being ridiculous. One little prank and you completely lose your mind." One little prank. There it was. Not quite a confession, but close enough to confirm what her panicked overreaction had already revealed. She'd sent me a live snake as a little prank, and now expected me to continue funding her lifestyle. A prank involving a dangerous animal isn't little, and a father cutting off financial support after 30 years of enabling isn't losing his mind. It's finally finding it. Her voice turned arctic. "This isn't over, old man. You think you can control me by controlling money? We'll see about that." The line went dead. I set the phone down gently and looked at Jessica, who had watched the entire conversation with growing admiration. The morning sunlight still streamed through her herbs. The coffee still tasted perfect. "She's coming here," Jessica said quietly. I nodded. "Probably with Peter. They'll want to continue this conversation in person." "Are you ready for that?" I thought about the question seriously. Was I ready for my daughter to arrive at our home with her unemployed husband, demanding access to money she'd never earned, threatening grandchildren she'd already weaponized? "Yes," I said, "I think I am." The sound of a car engine roaring into our driveway shattered the morning calm. Tires squealed against asphalt as the vehicle stopped abruptly, followed by the sharp slam of 2 car doors. Jessica and I exchanged a glance. We both knew who had arrived. Heavy footsteps marched across our front walkway with determined rhythm. The doorbell rang once, sharp and demanding, then immediately again when no one answered fast enough. I stood slowly, feeling remarkably calm despite the approaching storm. "Stay here," I told Jessica quietly. "No," her voice carried unexpected strength. "We're in this together." The doorbell gave way to aggressive knocking. I walked to the front entrance and opened it to find them standing on our porch, like a 2-person army ready for battle. Her face was flushed red with anger, her hair disheveled as if she'd dressed hastily and driven here in fury. Peter loomed behind her, his expression dark with malice I'd never seen directed at me before. "Dad," her voice vibrated with barely controlled rage, "we need to talk." "We already talked this morning." I remained in the doorway, not inviting them inside. I thought I was quite clear. "Clear? You were insane. You can't just cut me off because of some ridiculous misunderstanding about a Father's Day package." Even now, standing on my doorstep demanding money, she couldn't bring herself to admit what she'd done. "There's no misunderstanding. You sent me a snake." I responded appropriately. Peter stepped forward, his bulk filling more of the doorway. "Look, old man, maybe you didn't think this through properly. She has expenses, responsibilities. Kids need things. Kids whose mother threatens to keep them away from their grandparents when she doesn't get money," I replied evenly. Her face contorted with desperate fury. "Fine. You want to play hardball? You'll never see your grandchildren again. Emma and Jake will grow up knowing their grandfather chose money over family." The words that had once been my greatest fear now felt powerless against the clarity I'd gained. I looked at my daughter and saw not the child I'd raised, but the manipulative stranger she'd become. "That's not a threat," I said quietly. "That's a blessing." The shock on her face was complete. This was not the response she'd expected. not the devastating blow that had always brought me to my knees before. Peter's mouth fell open. What? Dee, if you're the kind of person who uses children as weapons against their grandparents, then perhaps it's better that they're not exposed to that kind of manipulation while they're young. Peter's expression shifted to something darker. He stepped forward close enough that I could smell the anger radiating from him. We know where you live, old man, he said, his voice low and menacing. We know your routines, your schedule. You might want to reconsider your position. I felt Jessica tense behind me, but I remained perfectly still. Are you threatening me, Peter? I'm just saying that family relationships work both ways. You want to cut us off? Fine, but don't expect us to just disappear quietly. Actually, I said, that's exactly what I expect. And if you choose not to disappear quietly, that becomes a matter for the police rather than family negotiation. She grabbed Peter's arm, perhaps sensing he was pushing into territory that could have legal consequences, but her touch didn't calm him. It seemed to fuel his aggression. You think you're so smart, Peter continued. You think cutting off our money makes you powerful. There are other ways to get what we need. I'm sure there are, I agreed. Like getting jobs, for instance. Novel concept, but people have been supporting themselves through employment for centuries. This isn't over, she hissed, her desperation transforming into pure venom. You'll regret treating us like this. Family doesn't abandon family, and there will be consequences. There already are consequences, I said. You're living them right now. They stared at me for a long moment, perhaps finally understanding that no amount of threats, guilt, or manipulation was going to restore their access to my resources. The man who had spent 30 years being their personal bank had simply closed. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stalked back to their car. Peter followed, but not before giving me one last menacing look. I watched them drive away, their car engine revving unnecessarily loud. Only when their taillights disappeared did I close the front door and turn to Jessica. Her face was pale, but her eyes held something I hadn't seen in years, pride. We're going to need legal advice, I said. Evening brought the quiet normalcy that had become precious in our house. Jessica and I sat at our kitchen table after dinner, the domestic routine providing comfort after the morning's chaos. She sipped chamomile tea while I nursed my second cup of coffee, both of us processing the day's events. The kitchen had always been our sanctuary for serious conversations. It was here we'd discussed buying the house, planned for retirement, talked through concerns about our early struggles with money. Now it served as the place where we contemplated the complete breakdown of our family relationship. I keep thinking about when she was 8, Jessica said quietly. Remember the Mother's Day breakfast she made? Burned toast and orange juice with too much pulp, but she was so proud. I did remember her in pink pajamas, standing on a kitchen stool to reach the counter, determined to surprise us with breakfast in bed. The memory felt like it belonged to someone else's family now. She used to draw us pictures, I said. Stick figures of our family holding hands. I kept them in my office desk drawer for years. I still have some in that memory box upstairs. Jessica's voice carried maternal grief. William, she's still our daughter, despite everything that's happened today. The words I'd been expecting all day. Jessica's instinct to heal, to find middle ground, to somehow restore what had been broken. It was one of the qualities I'd fallen in love with, this unwavering belief that families could overcome anything. Jess, I said gently. She crossed a line. I have one more step to take. Her teacup paused halfway to her lips. What kind of step? I looked at my wife's face, seeing the concern there, the hope that whatever I was planning might somehow bring our daughter back instead of pushing her further away. How could I explain that bringing her back was no longer the goal? Something permanent, I said. Something that ensures this morning's scene never happens again. You're talking about changing the will. It wasn't a question. Jessica knew me well enough to follow my thought process, to understand that legal protection was the only solution left. Yes. She was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with the implications. Changing our estate planning would be more than a financial decision. It would be a formal acknowledgement that our daughter was no longer trustworthy. The grandchildren, she said finally. Emma and Jake will be better off not learning that love can be purchased with money. I reached across the table and took her hand. Jessica, what she did today wasn't desperation. It was calculated cruelty. The snake, the threats, the manipulation. That's who she's chosen to become. But if we cut her out completely, we protect ourselves from future abuse. We protect our marriage from constantly managing her crises. We protect our retirement from being slowly drained away by someone who sees us as a resource rather than parents. Jessica squeezed my hand, her thumb tracing across my knuckles in the gesture that had comforted me through decades of smaller challenges. This wasn't a smaller challenge, though. This was the end of something fundamental. Will it stop her? She asked. If you change everything legally, will she finally leave us alone? It will remove her incentive for contact. No access to money, no inheritance to protect, no leverage to maintain. She'll have to find other people to manipulate. The pragmatism of it felt cold but necessary. She would move on to easier targets, people who hadn't yet learned to recognize her patterns. I hate that it's come to this, Jessica whispered. So do I. But I won't spend our remaining years being held hostage by threats and manipulation. I won't let her destroy what we've built together. Outside our kitchen window, the suburban evening continued its peaceful rhythm. The Hendersons were walking their dog. Mrs. Patterson was watering her garden, normal people living normal lives. When will you do it? Jessica asked. Tomorrow morning. I'll call Margaret Summers first thing. She's handled our legal work for 15 years. She'll know exactly what needs to be done to make it ironclad. Jessica nodded slowly, accepting the inevitable, even as it broke her heart. And if she finds out? She will eventually. But by then the legal protections will be in place. Her anger won't be able to touch us anymore. I stood up from the table, carrying our empty cups to the sink. Behind me, I heard Jessica's quiet sigh. Not disagreement, but grief for the daughter we'd lost. Tomorrow, I would take that final step. Tonight, I would hold my wife and let her mourn the family we'd thought we were. Margaret Summers' law office occupied the third floor of a granite building downtown, its walls lined with legal volumes that spoke of 15 years protecting families like ours. I sat across from her mahogany desk with a manila folder of documents, feeling calmer than I had in weeks. William, she said, removing her reading glasses, when you called this morning, you mentioned needing comprehensive legal protection. Tell me what's been happening. Margaret had handled our wills, property transfers, and Jessica's mother's estate. She knew us as the stable couple who planned ahead and paid bills promptly. What I was about to describe would sound like a different family entirely. I explained the inheritance argument, the snake delivery, the blocked credit cards, yesterday's threatening confrontation. Margaret listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, her expression growing more serious with each detail. Peter said they know where we live, know our routines, I concluded. It felt like a direct threat. She set down her pen and leaned back. William, this goes beyond a family disagreement. You're describing harassment and intimidation. We need to address this on multiple fronts. That's what I was hoping you'd say. Margaret pulled out a fresh legal pad. Let's start with your will. You mentioned wanting to restructure your inheritance. I want my money to go to my grandchildren's education, not to my daughter's casino. That's a wise decision, William. Her voice carried professional warmth. We can create an educational trust fund that provides for Emma and Jake's schooling, college expenses, and legitimate educational needs while preventing any access by their parents. She outlined the framework. An independent trustee would manage the funds, releasing money only for documented educational expenses. She and Peter would have no access, no control, no ability to manipulate the children's inheritance. What about Jessica? I asked. Fully protected, of course. The house, your retirement accounts, her security, nothing changes there. This only affects what would have gone to your daughter. Next came the restraining order documentation. Margaret opened a new file and began systematically recording yesterday's confrontation, the threatening language, the escalating pattern that had culminated in actual intimidation. The snake incident is particularly concerning, she said, writing quickly. Using live animals to frighten elderly parents shows planning and malice that courts take seriously. How long does this process take? The will modifications can be finalized within the week. The restraining order can be filed today. Once it's granted, any contact from them becomes a legal matter rather than a family dispute. I felt something release in my chest, a tension I'd been carrying for months. The weight of being perpetually available for her crises, of walking on eggshells to avoid triggering her threats, of enabling destructive behavior, all of it was ending. "There's one more thing," Margaret said. "Based on what you've described, I recommend documenting everything for potential future legal action. Keep records of any attempts to contact you, any violations, any attempts to involve the grandchildren. You think it will get worse before it gets better?" People who use manipulation and threats don't usually accept boundaries gracefully. When she discovers she's been cut out of your will and served with a restraining order, her reaction may be significant. But that no longer frightened me. With legal protections in place, her anger would be directed at a system designed to handle such behavior, not at two elderly parents trying to enjoy their retirement. Margaret's assistant brought in the prepared documents. As I signed my name to each page, I felt the satisfying finality of decisions made and implemented. 30 years of financial enabling was officially ending. Our home would be legally protected from harassment. "The restraining order should be approved by end of business today," Margaret said. "Court officers will serve both of them by tomorrow morning. After that, any contact with you or Jessica becomes a criminal matter." I stood to leave, shaking hands with the woman who had just helped me reclaim control of my own life. Outside her office windows, the city continued its normal rhythm. "William?" Margaret called as I reached her door. "You've made the right choices. Your family's safety and security come first." I nodded, tucking the folder under my arm. Tomorrow morning, she would discover that manipulation was no longer an option. Tonight, Jessica and I would sleep peacefully, knowing the law was finally on our side. 2 days passed in the most peaceful quiet I'd experienced in years. Jessica and I fell back into the comfortable routines that had been constantly interrupted by her crises. Morning coffee without dreading phone calls, afternoon walks without checking for missed messages, evening dinners without discussing the latest financial emergency. On Thursday afternoon, Margaret called to confirm what I'd been anticipating. "William, the documents were delivered at 2:15 today. Both of them have been served with the restraining order, and they've received copies of the will modifications. It's done." I thanked her and hung up, then sat quietly in my chair for several minutes. Outside our window, Mrs. Patterson was planting spring flowers in her garden. The Henderson children were riding bicycles on the sidewalk. Normal suburban life, continuing its peaceful rhythm. "The papers were delivered?" Jessica asked from the kitchen doorway. "This afternoon," I confirmed. "It's finished." She came and sat beside me, taking my hand in hers. We didn't need to discuss what her reaction might be, or whether she would try to find ways around the legal barriers Margaret had erected. The law was clear. The protections were comprehensive. And for the first time in 30 years, we were truly free from her manipulation. I thought about the daughter I'd raised, the little girl who'd drawn stick figure families and made breakfast in bed on special occasions. That child had grown into someone who sent live snakes to her father and threatened to weaponize his grandchildren against him. The transformation had been gradual enough that I'd spent decades making excuses for increasingly unacceptable behavior. But the woman who'd stood on my doorstep demanding money and making threats wasn't someone I needed to enable any longer. The legal documents had created the boundaries that love alone could never establish. They got what they wanted. I was no longer in their lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had spent years threatening to cut off my access to Emma and Jake whenever I didn't comply with her financial demands. Now, through her own escalating behavior, she'd ensured that separation permanently, while simultaneously losing any claim to the inheritance she'd been so desperate to control. Emma and Jake would be provided for through their educational trust fund, managed by professionals who couldn't be manipulated or threatened. Their college expenses, tutoring, books, legitimate educational needs, all secured without giving their parents access to resources they'd proven incapable of managing responsibly. Jessica squeezed my hand. "Do you think she understands what she's lost?" "She will," I said. "The restraining order means any attempt to contact us becomes a criminal matter. The will changes mean there's no inheritance to fight for, no financial incentive to maintain even hostile contact. She'll have to find other people to manipulate. And if she violates the restraining order, then it becomes the police department's problem, not ours. For 30 years, I'd been her safety net, catching her every fall while she learned nothing from the experience. I'd sold my classic car to pay her gambling debts. I'd covered her rent when she claimed unexpected emergencies. I'd written check after check, always believing that this time would be different. This crisis would be the last one. The snake had been her final communication with me. Everything she wanted to say about our relationship had been contained in that box, dangerous, venomous, designed to frighten and intimidate. But instead of driving me back into compliance, it had driven me to Margaret's office and the legal protections I should have sought years earlier. As the sun set through our kitchen window, Jessica and I prepared dinner together with the easy cooperation of a couple who no longer carried the weight of constant family drama. No phone calls interrupted our conversation. No emergency text demanded immediate financial rescue. No threats hung over our heads about access to grandchildren. The quiet felt profound, like the silence after a long, exhausting storm has finally passed. Tomorrow we would wake up in a house legally protected from harassment. Our retirement savings would remain intact, earning interest for our own security rather than being slowly drained by someone else's poor choices. Our marriage would continue without the constant stress of managing an adult child's manufactured crises. I had reclaimed my role as a father who loved his daughter enough to refuse to enable her destruction of herself and others. Legal boundaries had replaced emotional manipulation. Professional consequences had replaced family guilt. The law had given me back my life. Tonight, for the first time in decades, I would sleep without wondering what tomorrow's crisis would cost me. The months that followed brought a peace I hadn't experienced since Jessica was young. The legal boundaries Margaret had established weren't just pieces of paper. They were a fortress of protection that finally allowed us to breathe freely in our own home. Spring turned to summer, and Jessica began tending her garden with renewed enthusiasm. I noticed she hummed while she worked, something she hadn't done in years. The constant tension that had lived in her shoulders, the way she'd flinch whenever the phone rang, all of that gradually melted away. We received exactly 3 attempts at contact during those first few months. Each one was documented, photographed, and forwarded to Margaret's office. The first was a letter delivered to our mailbox, filled with accusations and demands that I reconsider my cruel decision. The second was a bouquet of funeral flowers left on our doorstep with a card that read, "For the death of our family." The third was a series of phone calls from different numbers, all hung up the moment we answered. Each incident was handled with professional efficiency. Margaret contacted the appropriate authorities, restraining order violations were filed, and the harassment stopped as quickly as it had begun. The system worked exactly as designed. But the real transformation wasn't in the legal protections. It was in how Jessica and I rediscovered our marriage. Without the constant crisis management, we remembered what it felt like to be partners rather than co-conspirators in damage control. We took weekend trips to places we'd always meant to visit. We had dinner conversations that didn't revolve around the latest financial emergency. We laughed together, something that had become increasingly rare over the years. The Educational Trust Fund for Emma and Jake was established with meticulous care. Margaret worked with financial advisors to create something that would truly serve the children's best interests rather than their parents' immediate desires. The trustee, a retired school administrator named Dr. Patricia Wells, understood the delicate balance between providing opportunity and preventing manipulation. I found myself sleeping through the night for the first time in years. No more lying awake at 3 a.m, worrying about what crisis tomorrow might bring. No more checking my phone obsessively, dreading the next desperate call for money. The silence of my phone became a source of comfort rather than anxiety. Jessica and I began volunteering at the local literacy center, working with adults who were learning to read. It felt good to help people who genuinely wanted to improve their lives, who appreciated assistance rather than demanding it as their due. The gratitude in their eyes reminded me what healthy relationships looked like. One evening in late autumn, as we sat on our front porch watching the leaves change colors, Jessica asked the question I'd been expecting. "Do you ever regret it? The legal action, cutting her off completely?" I considered my answer carefully, watching Mrs. Patterson rake leaves in her yard while her grandchildren played nearby. Normal grandparents, normal family visits, normal relationships built on love rather than financial obligation. "I regret that it was necessary," I said finally. I regret that 30 years of generosity taught her the wrong lessons. I regret that we enabled behavior that ultimately hurt her more than it helped her. But do I regret protecting us from further abuse? Never. Jessica nodded, understanding. She'd been thinking the same things, wrestling with the same complicated emotions. I wonder how Emma and Jake are doing, she said quietly. They'll be fine. Children are resilient, and when they're old enough to understand the full story, the trust fund will be there for them. Real help, not manipulation disguised as love. The trust fund had been structured to provide educational opportunities without giving their parents any access to the principal. Emma and Jake would have their college tuition paid directly to accredited institutions. They could receive funding for tutoring, educational camps, legitimate learning experiences. But the money would never flow through their parents' hands, never become leverage in family arguments. As winter settled over our neighborhood, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. A Father's Day morning that had started with coffee and newspapers had ended with police officers and animal control. A simple package had revealed the depths of manipulation and cruelty that had been hiding behind the facade of family love. The snake in that box had been more than just a cruel prank. It had been a perfect metaphor for what our relationship had become. Something dangerous masquerading as a gift, something that could strike without warning, something that required professional intervention to handle safely. But unlike the snake, which had been an innocent creature used as a weapon, the people who had sent it had made deliberate choices. They had chosen manipulation over honesty, threats over communication, cruelty over love. And in making those choices, they had chosen the consequences that followed. The final irony wasn't lost on me. She had spent years threatening to cut me out of her life, to keep the grandchildren away from me, to punish me financially for not meeting her demands. In the end, she had accomplished exactly what she'd threatened, but not in the way she'd intended. Through her own escalating behavior, she had forced me to protect myself in ways that made reconciliation impossible. The restraining order would expire eventually, but the will changes were permanent. The educational trust for Emma and Jake would outlive us all, providing opportunities for children who deserved better than to be pawns in their parents' schemes. Sometimes, late at night, I would think about the daughter I had raised and wonder where that loving child had gone. But those moments of sadness were brief, overwhelmed by the profound relief of finally being free from the cycle of crisis and rescue that had dominated our lives for so long. Jessica and I were building something new in the space that manipulation had once occupied. We were learning to trust our instincts again, to say no without guilt, to recognize the difference between helping and enabling. We were discovering what it felt like to be generous by choice rather than coercion. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the walls themselves had been holding their breath and could finally exhale. The rooms that had once echoed with arguments about money and responsibility now filled with the quiet sounds of a couple rediscovering their partnership. On Father's Day the following year, Jessica and I spent the morning in our garden working together to plant new flowers. No packages arrived, no phone calls interrupted our peace, no crises demanded our immediate attention. Just two people who had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their choices. The snake had taught us that even the most innocent-looking packages could contain hidden dangers. But it had also taught us that we had the strength to call for help when we needed it, the wisdom to recognize threats disguised as gifts, and the courage to protect ourselves when protection was necessary. As I watered the new plantings, I thought about growth, how some things flourish with endless support while others need boundaries to thrive. We had learned the hard way which category our daughter belonged to. Now, finally, we could focus on nurturing the relationships that deserved our care. The story that had begun with a mysterious package and a wife's intuitive warning had ended with the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't dramatic confrontations or emotional reconciliations. Sometimes they're simply the peace that comes from knowing you've made the right choices, protected the right people, and learned to love yourself enough to demand respect. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.